Through interviews, expert discussions, and narratives, we uncover pathways to resilience, innovation, and evolution. Welcome to All Things Change.
Hey, aloha everyone. I am Jenny
I'm Olani.
and today we are diving into the topic of transformative finance. And today with us is Curt Lyon, and he's the executive director of Transform Finance. So hi Curt, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for
Welcome.
joining us.
Yeah, hi y'all. Thanks so much for having me.
So, just to kind of dive in and give our listeners kind of a little bit of background about yourself, can you share a little bit about what you and Transform Finance do?
Yeah, so Transform Finance is a research, education, and advocacy nonprofit organization that works to align the capital of investors with social justice values. And so what that really means is we really like to look at what the most cutting edge activity is in the impact space and really looking at community-centered models that are really rethinking what impact can be and seeing how we can both get more capital to those kinds of initiatives, but also to use those as inspiration in different parts of capital and at different levels of scale. So we've worked at really all levels of scale in the capital markets, from public markets to large institutional investors to foundations to impact funds to really small but really impactful community projects.
When we were talking in the green room, for our listeners, if you're trying to figure out what is transformative finance, I know when we were talking in the green room, you said, well, there are a lot of different definitions out there. How would you define transformative finance?
Yeah, so fortunately, this one I have a pre-baked answer for, because when Transform Finance was founded 10 years ago, or actually 11 years ago now, we developed a set of 3 principles of transformative finance. We even use that term, which are 1, whenever possible, the investment should include community governance or ownership. 2, the investment should be non-extractive, which means leaving whatever is receiving the investment better off than it was before the investment. Mm-hmm. And number 3 is a fair balance of risk and return across all stakeholders. And that last piece is really on my mind these days, because we've been doing a lot of investments that are building businesses that are owned by not just investors, but also workers and potentially other stakeholders, such as community members, consumers, entities established to steward a purpose. And thinking about how risk and return is balanced across those stakeholders is something that we've been doing a lot these days. And we call that work alternative ownership enterprises.
Wow, I love that idea. We're trying to do something like that as well. And to let everybody know, I sort of did some research early on in Changemakers and found Transform Finance and reached out, and they were just so wonderful in trying to provide me some context with their work. But I was really looking at ways in which we could reimagine the financial systems. I guess kind of like what our book club book is talking about, decolonizing wealth, particularly within Native communities, and how do we get more engaged in the financial processes. And so I just really thought that your model was a mechanism to do that, and was really excited by the work that you're doing. In particular, that last piece about like sort of co-owning and co-ownership, which I think is really interesting when you think about that community piece and what that looks like. And, with all of the money sort of pouring out of the federal government related to new infrastructure and climate change, and thinking about new ways to think about energy companies and technology companies, all of these funds that are pouring out for that, that you are now creating this model around how companies can engage with community and have shared ownership over these businesses. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time for shared ownership broadly. I think a lot of folks that even 5, 6, 7 years ago were not really interested in this, or at least like weren't really talking about it. I'm thinking of a lot of impact investors, folks in philanthropy, who
Right.
are often we're not following their lead, but like we need their participation in order to make make this stuff happen.
Right.
And the past year or two, like we've just really been, I think, seeing a sea change in interest to
Oh,
create these models. On the enterprise side, there's a really important bill that's been proposed in Congress that would provide more funding for buyouts for employee ownership firms, which would really be
oh, wow.
transformative in creating more of those, getting federal dollars. And yeah, Olani, like you said, that there's a lot of money coming from the federal government, from ARPA, IRA,
Right.
and there's a big conversation happening right now on how we can really leverage that for these kinds of transformative investments. Feels like a bit of a mad scramble, but also a really exciting opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. Mad scramble in trying to like really take those the different innovations happening around like climate change and like Biden has that big infrastructure funding coming out, right? And then like investment and participatory budget, transforming finance, work workforce development, and work around rural communities, and really trying to get like ownership and community. So there's all these pieces, and I feel like I'm in a mad scramble to sort of like put that all together in a new way that really sort of reallocates the money into community, right? And I think that's a lot about what I understand that your work has been about, like engaging community in making decisions about with investors or with traditional funders, banks, for example, or financing, and wanting to like open those doors up. Could you talk a little bit about that and what that like looks like, and you know how you are engaging community, or how are traditional maybe financial institutions opening their doors to a different way of engaging stakeholders?
Yeah, definitely. So maybe by way of background, because I think it's helpful to
Yeah.
explain how Transform Finance got into that work. Because
Awesome.
again, we don't make investments ourselves, and we're not leading investment projects.
Hmm.
But in the past, especially before COVID, we were doing a lot of work with educating grassroots leaders like activists, organizers, folks in the nonprofit space around how to engage with finance.
Yeah.
So we kind of breaking down the different financial actors that are both in the way of some of the goals that they're trying to achieve, but also maybe potential partners, if they were able to form strategic partnerships and leverage financial capital. So kind of like going on beyond just your typical like shareholder engagement kinds of
Yeah.
strategies, and seeing what kind of interesting creations could be happen could be made through these like strategic partnerships.
Hmm.
And through a lot of that work, we also got connected to folks on the ground who are building more like democratic versions of place-based funds. So we
Yeah.
had an education program around that, and have done some various supports for projects around the country doing that work. And through that experience of really working with folks on the ground and then their constituents, those were kind of trainings of just folks in the communities that these funds were serving, coming to learn about finance and like how that kind of plugs into this broader ecosystem of capital that the fund was trying to develop.
Hmm.
We got really interested in this idea of participatory investment,
Yeah.
because there's clearly so much power if you've ever been in rooms where non-financial actors are given the mic, and a seat at the table,
Yeah.
to define clearly, this is what I would want capital to be funding in my community. And
Yeah.
as a business owner, as someone who has experience with like personal debt, like this is what I need that finance to look like.
Hmm.
Otherwise it's not going to work for our communities. And the power really comes, I think, in a couple of different ways. But one, I think it really makes these investments stronger and more resilient because you have the backing of communities who are participating in those processes. But you also have just naturally the connections to all of the different entities and organizations and partnerships that participants are bringing into that space. And that really can be a form of power building, right? Like we're creating these projects are creating finance as a tool to serve the movements that are within those communities. It's not an outside investor coming in. So from seeing all of that work, we did a project where we tried to document a lot of different examples of this happening around the country and in lots of different ways. Like there's some democratic capital funds, like some of the ones we supported, for example, the Boston Ujima project in Boston, the Real People's Fund out in the Bay Area. But then there's also some really awesome examples of real estate development projects that are engaging communities in different ways, like the East Portland Community Investment Trust, the Kensington Corridor Trust is in Philadelphia, is buying up commercial properties in a very community controlled way that is deciding, okay, how are we going to manage these properties? What's next? Who's going to go into these buildings? And we documented a lot of those projects, put out a report, and then did a lot of work with funders and impact investors to kind of popularize this as an idea that is really, really impactful in the impact sector. And so we've done a variety of pieces of work. Olani, you mentioned banks as well. So we did a bit of work trying to expand that those concepts to banks with a partner, the Beneficial State Foundation, and really look at banking processes and where you might be able to add community engagement at different levels. And one more thing on that is I think it's important because when you look at some of these very small democratic community funds next to a bank that operates, in a traditional banking way, you might say, okay, how do you like draw the line between these two things? And I think you're never going to make a bank, completely, community governed and have, everyone voting on everything that's happening. Even credit unions are a version of that. They're cooperatives, they're cooperatively run, but they have like levels of member engagement. And many argue that they could go further on that. But I think we look at those three principles I mentioned earlier and transformative investment generally as kind of a North Star. And for each financial actor that we work with, we like to try to figure out how we can maybe push them or create strategies or, create partnerships that open doors to moving further down that spectrum from, a more traditional capital mindset to a more transformative one. So that's kind of how we took that approach to the banks and said, what little pieces from the more community governed projects could we take and apply it to that context?
And were there could you share some examples about how banks or traditional financial institutions, some projects that they brought in community people into?
Yeah, so this wasn't a project that we were involved with. This is just something that we saw in our field scan. And this is actually a credit union, but there's this credit union out in New Mexico, New Senda, who created this program called Co-op Capital. And that was a really innovative project because what it did was partner with existing organizations in the community that already had a lot of respect, a lot of connections, and a lot of legitimacy in the communities that this program was trying to serve, which is largely immigrant communities. So they were, and I don't have a list of the partners on top of my head, but I know there was a university, there were some businesses, some nonprofit organizations. And the credit union essentially outsourced the underwriting and relationship building pieces to these organizations. And they each created their own process for how they were going to vet potential borrowers. And they really use kind of like a relational approach rather than your
Uh-huh.
traditional kind of stringent credit approach.
Right,
Um,
right.
and Nusenda, the credit union, was willing to kind of like do the operational pieces and hold the financial infrastructure for that project. But the community partners were really the ones doing the work, giving very small loans to
Yeah,
individuals and entrepreneurs.
that's
And I
awesome.
think, yeah, and I hear that the kind of report back on that was it was super successful, and they're trying
Yeah.
to implement it in other places, and it's been influential in a few other locations as
I
well.
know it makes me wonder, like, I wonder what the sort of like, I mean, if it was like through financing, like a loan, if that was the tool that was used, like what was the return on, like, did they get better, payback? Was it paid maybe ahead of time or on time now that you have, because you said one of the key pieces was it was a relational sort of like vetting and it came through relationships. And so that's a whole nother level of accountability, as far as like when you give out funding. And so it'd be interesting to sort of look at some of that data to see if when you do that and if it's relational based or you're engaging community, if you get maybe, more uh, maybe quicker returns on like the repayment. I do know I have seen some papers that have said that when you engage community, you think of it in terms of also developing financial knowledge within your community because they're learning how to do these things. They are participating, and so they're kind of like it's like hands-on learning as far as like what do you consider as part of a loan program. I just was wondering, have you seen any information about when you engage community, sort of some of the benefits that maybe weren't considered and were sort of surprise benefits that came out?
Yeah. So there is a lot of kind of emerging research, I guess, but a lot of it is kind of anecdotal or kind of impact reports from individual projects. But
Yeah,
some of that data is out there. It's really good. On the specific piece that you were mentioning on loan
yeah,
repayment pieces,
right.
I haven't seen anything specific on that, but a lot of our work is really just shouting out amazing work that we've seen
Yeah,
others do.
yeah,
So folks who have really been at the forefront of this kind of character-based lending or
yeah.
relationship-based lending movement include Community Credit Lab, which is now part of Common Future, which helps set up
Mm-hmm.
programs similar to the capital program that I mentioned earlier
Yeah,
at various organizations. And then I'm somewhat familiar with the work of Vanessa Roanhorse and Jamie Glochet, who
yeah,
formerly was at Native Women Lead and now is at Common Future. But they've done some really amazing leadership around developing funds that do character-based lending for Indigenous entrepreneurs
yeah.
in the U.S. So have to shout them out. I'm sure they would know. I wish they were here to back me up on this.
Yeah,
Um, but in terms of other kinds of benefits of
yeah,
community engagement, there definitely have been a lot. One piece that I think makes sense when you think about it, but has been shown in at least a couple of projects, is that folks who participate in finance vehicles,
yeah.
particularly those that are like more participatory, end up being more actively engaged in like local politics.
Right,
And this is something that is like very directly fostered by some of these community-led projects, like the Boston Ujima Project,
right.
which is a fund in Boston, is connected to a bunch of other efforts that go well beyond just the fun part. Like they have this whole cultural organizing work. They have a whole policy work at the
Yeah,
city level in Boston, but also the state level, as they're connected to their parent organization, the Center for Economic Democracy.
yeah,
So that's one piece that I think is important, that it can have
yeah,
broader like democratic effects. But on
yeah,
the personal finances, I know also that I've heard anecdotally effects on folks who are talking about managing like an organization's finances, like having that being applied to their own personal finances. So there is like a financial literacy piece too.
Right.
And I know
Right.
that some projects that center community investment itself, like some projects will have communities put their own money in and
Right.
actually get a return on it in various ways. And I'm happy to get into that if it's of
Yeah.
interest. But
Mhm.
Yeah.
some of those projects also come with financial literacy trainings. Like I know the community investment trust model that was piloted in East Portland had this whole program that communities went through before or while they made investments into the project. So that was like a very conscious impact goal of theirs, is they wanted to have that financial literacy piece.
That's cool. I know, like within the Native Hawaiian community, a lot of times those like tools seem very big and sort of like out of reach and left to other people, right? And so when take the opportunity to create your own, and then you have to sort of like develop the application, determine what's going on in the application, determine what's important to you. You know, you're sort of like learning that process in a way that feels real community grounded, but it, it's the same process that like maybe big banks or investors do. It's just making it more, again, community based, and so it takes sort of that stigma away around, and then they look back and they're like, oh my god, this is just like what other people do. We see that a lot around, like, when you ask indigenous person, are you a philanthropist, they'll say, oh no, I don't have millions of dollars. Yeah, but if you do give, and if you create a giving circle or something, you're coming together with a community, and you are purposefully and giving, pulling your money together and giving intentionally, and whatever requirements or whatever, however you do it, you are now like a philanthropist. But all those big financial words and systems seem out of reach. And I think like what you folks are doing and what participatory investing and budgeting does is it gives us a framework in community to actually do the same things that those, you know, big institutions that we think are out of reach are doing as well. And so it's really great to like get your hands around those financial tools and learn it from a hands-on approach.
Mhm.
I did want to sort of talk. We were talking about benefits and continuing to talk about that. I was wondering, how do you encourage investors to sort of shift from thinking about short-term gains to more like these benefits that are more long-term, and are more community benefits, not just sort of like their return on investment?
Yeah, and this is the the $1 million question, or I don't know, these days like
Right?
$10 trillion question. Um, but so the way that we think about it, again, like I mentioned earlier, we have worked with folks kind of across the whole financial ecosystem, from not impact minded investors to the most impact minded investors who are willing to do all sorts of concessionary things with their capital and do whatever it takes to achieve a certain level of impact.
Right.
So when you're dealing with that latter group, that's great. That's our favorite, because then that we can really try to get them involved with the most impactful projects and think, okay, what's really the type of capital that's needed, like what terms are needed on what time horizon, how can we be most flexible for the entrepreneur, the business, whoever's receiving the capital. That's really what can be done on that end of the spectrum. And then when we're dealing with an investor who is not necessarily the most impact focused, we'll say, okay, what are your constraints? Like how much can we do given your position? Are you an investment officer at a foundation, in the endowment side, who needs to achieve a certain rate of return every year? There's an organizational constraint. It's like, okay, well, maybe let's figure out what might be within your bounds, within your investment portfolio, that we could think differently. And you might not get
Yeah.
all the way to the deep community engagement stuff, but
Right.
there's still pieces of creating a walkway to get there. But it's in the middle, I think, where your question is really important, where there might be investors who are impact minded, and really do care about the impact of their capital and want to go more, but don't necessarily have like the tools, the language. There's a lot of folks shouting in the impact space around what's the most impactful, right? And we try to put forth our version of that, but it's kind of it is a big space, and it's a big tent, and there's a lot of voices to listen to. So when shifting that mindset from more profit oriented to long term, more impact focused, you really have to like understand what an investor is going for, right? Like, what's their motivations? Are they working at particular impact goals at a foundation? Like, is it racial justice? Is it working on the wealth gap that we have in this country? Is it climate? Is it indigenous rights? So I think, figuring out what impact angle and then what opportunities, what's happening in the market there that might be kind of, again, at that next stage of impact. But I'll be upfront about it. Like, when you take that next step, you often are sacrificing generally some kind of return or risk adjusted return, right? Like, I think if you are really serious about making impact, you do have to take a little bit more risk, because the projects that aren't getting funded are in our traditional financial terms, they're deemed more risky.
Right.
And I would encourage everyone to really challenge their assumptions of risk and what that actually means. Because if you think about impact risk, right, there's a big risk to a community of a project not working out if it doesn't receive the right type of capital. Like, if you're trying to fit traditional investment tools into a structure that will take on too much debt, or maybe the investor will have too much ownership stake, and that dilutes the voices of the founders, potentially community members who are involved in the project. There's a risk that the project doesn't achieve what it was set out to do. There's kind of this mission drift opportunity where they say, oh no, we have to increase our profits to meet the investor demand for returns, and shifts away from its original purpose. So I kind of I got up on my soapbox there. That's just to go back to your original question. Unfortunately, there's no one real silver bullet for how to convince an investor to shift their impact framework. I think there are enough investors out there who really do care, and it's just a matter of figuring out how to do that. But being real that, like, you might have to sacrifice impact for returns. And I think to build the world that we want to see, we're going to need to do some of that.
Do you find, sorry.
Jen.
Do you find that sometimes shifting that mindset is a little easier? Because I know with us, in terms of thinking about finance as a whole for Native Hawaiians, there is a mindset shift that kind of needs to happen in order to be to get to that next level. Do you find that it's once you do have that conversation with your investor about what they want to accomplish, do you find that there's a greater challenge to shift their mindset, or they're kind of already sort of, it's in the back of their mind, but just trying to figure it out to where they also have a benefit out of their investment?
So I would say, so a lot of our work is more on that kind of like education and not that direct, like hand-holding piece. So we haven't had a ton of direct experiences where I can say, oh, we worked with this one investor and then like flipped them, or like had them kind of see the light, so to speak. But a lot of our work has been on the field building and like broad narrative building education side. So like we get a lot of that feedback of like, oh, I really hadn't really hadn't seen the logic behind using alternative financing structures, like going beyond just usual debt and equity investments for entrepreneurs. But now see that, actually sometimes that those tools aren't what my entrepreneurs need. And, we've put out some resources and have lots of conversations around some of those tools. So I end up talking to folks who have made the flip, so to speak. And honestly, like I would say the most common thing is, within an institution is having like a real champion. So whether it's like a foundation, a family office, an investment advisor who works with a bunch of different investors, having someone who really is open to hearing new ideas, and is really really strong at navigating like the internal dynamics of how capital actually moves, because it really, there's always so many kind of check boxes and red tape and hoops to jump through at every investment institution. So finding partners who are really receptive to your narrative, I think is really important. At least in our work. I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but that's my honest go.
Oh, that's great. I think I'm going to have to go back and listen to this part in particular, because I think when you were talking, you were sort of mapping out this process around like how communities could like start to like have these conversations. I really like the idea about, understanding where that financial institution is coming from, what are their constraints, and like seeing, maybe today we can go this far, and then maybe tomorrow we can take another step, but also really understanding the constraints of investors and their stockholders or whoever is in play. And I just love that way that you mapped it out. I have to go back and listen to that again because I thought it was fabulous. So thank you for that.
And then I was wondering, are there any specific sectors or industries where you see more success over another?
That's a good question. And our lens has been so industry agnostic, aside from a few kind of specific deep dives that we've taken. Like we've done projects on looking at energy development projects in the global south, in media investment, in worker tech investment. So we've gotten familiar with some of those at the like micro level, but because a lot of our current work is around kind of having a broad lens of like ownership, whether it's worker ownership, community ownership, and participation, we haven't done a lot of sector specific work. I realize I'm not really answering the question. Let me think for a second.
No. I think I may have just pulled that out of the ether and surprised you with that. Sorry. I apologize.
No,
it was just kind of going in my head where I was thinking, oh, wow, I wonder if there's any specific sector or industry where there are a lot more, it's more intuitive to them, and it aligns more with what they want to accomplish within the community.
Yeah. And it depends like what scale of finance are we thinking? Are we thinking like investors who are investing directly in entrepreneurs,
or
like directly at that
across the board?
What I would want to say is that sectors that are higher growth than others would actually have the most flexibility to do some more interesting things in terms of like shifting the balance of how much return is going to investors and how that capital is structured to make it more patient for entrepreneurs, like tech and climate, especially with like a ton of money coming in for energy development. But honestly, in my experience, even in the impact space or like the impact oriented versions of those kinds of investments, they typically are saying, "Oh, great! This is a great way to have impact and have the same returns," and is not really thinking about the how to make those investments what we would call the most transformative possible, which might be sharing some of the economic benefits with the communities that are benefiting
Mm,
from those energy projects. Having workers, other stakeholders involved.
yeah.
Um, those sorts of things. Of course, there are examples of projects that are doing that, but I wouldn't say like there's a sector that is really like leading the way.
We're going to pause
Okay.
briefly and we're going to hit a commercial and we will be right back.
The Change Center in downtown Hilo is more than just a workspace. It's a place steeped in history where the past meets the future. Offering flexible workspaces in a historic building, it's ideal for networking, collaboration, and growth. Visit the Change Center and be a part of Hilo's thriving co-working community. The Change Center, where history inspires innovation.
Aloha and welcome back. If you are just joining us, we have with Olani and me today, we have with us Curt Lyon, and he is with Transform Finance. He's the executive director. And Transform Finance believes that finance is a tool that can create both positive and negative outcomes. And Olani, you just had a question regarding community engagement with that, right?
Yeah, right before we took the break, we were talking a lot about like how investors can engage with community. But I wanted to sort of ask Kurt, like, have you seen, or are there methods, or what sort of framework should community use to sort of put themselves out there to, investors or banks or any kind of finance, maybe entity or organization or business?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and I think it's really important because I don't think that we can transform finance as as is in the name of the organization without the actual participation and the leadership of folks who are not finance people. Like
Um,
we work from the inside essentially, but I think we need a lot of those outside strategies to help hold investors accountable, bring new ideas to financial spaces, and
mhm,
also like actually have fights when finance is doing extractive or bad things, which it very
mhm,
often does, unfortunately. So there are a lot of examples of communities who have taken like activism to financial spaces
mhm,
at lots of different levels. I mean, at a high level with public markets, there's lots of shareholder engagement examples.
mhm,
So there's lots of different pathways to doing that, but the most common is shareholder engagement strategies, putting in proxy votes for the board, or sorry, for for shareholders in public companies. Um, and you have also likely heard of divestment campaigns that are pressuring investors to
yeah,
divest holdings. Probably the most famous historical example is apartheid South Africa, where student-run campaigns and just kind of mass protests around the financial holdings that investment firms had in South Africa really was a factor in ending apartheid. But there's also a lot of really interesting strategies that have been developed, especially over the past 10 years around that are kind of creative, developing new partnerships and getting voices into the
mhm,
halls of finance in new ways. Most recently, I was reading about tenant organizing for homes that are owned by large private equity firms. So actually,
yeah,
instead of just organizing one building, seeing that okay, the capital upstream is actually there's holdings in this real estate investment trust across this whole city, across this whole region. What if we
right.
talk to individuals at each building and build power that way rather than just
Cool.
doing it ourselves in our building? But that kind of logic, I think, flows from following the capital and saying, okay,
Right.
what would actually get underneath the skin of the capital here that's doing something bad? How do we
Mm,
organize that and use tactics that we're already familiar with? Uh, these were tenant organizers, but just doing it at a new scale instead of targeting a small
mm,
landlord. It's this massive landlord.
right.
We did a cohort of worker justice organizations in 2019. So seems archaic now, but this was a really awesome experience where we had 6 or so organizations that were developing strategies to engage financial actors for various worker constituencies that they had. And some were local, some were national organizations.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of really awesome ideas developed out of that, from developing a new fund that would compete with that would invest in entrepreneurs that were developing solutions for home care workers that are that's a very extractive industry, especially with like technology and apps that employ them or contract these workers and tend to take
Right.
more than their fair share, and leaving the workers precarious.
Right.
There were strategies trying to figure out how to build housing using pension fund dollars for union workers.
Hmm.
There was an engagement strategy for foundations for having responsible to make it so foundations would have to have a responsible contracting policy when they
Yeah.
were engaging with construction companies or investing in them, and just they were getting a lot of engagement from foundations who weren't really aware that this was an issue.
Mm,
Across all of these different examples, I think in terms of like how can communities engage,
yeah.
this is really like where it just becomes another avenue for organizing, right? Like
Right.
it's about finding partners who might be able to help you get into these rooms. It's about figuring out what makes the target tick.
Yeah.
Where is their power? Where do you have leverage in this situation?
Mm,
Unfortunately, in my opinion, a lot of times this does boil down to what you were saying, is there's this kind of reframing of community goals or community values in the terms of investors, where
right.
you can say, oh, if there's all this bad activity, folks are getting evicted. Oleni, you were talking about the
Yeah.
incarceration rates of Native
Mm,
Hawaiians,
yeah.
and how that has negative effects on the community. There are ways to frame that for an investor that actually kind of gets to the bottom line of like, okay,
Yeah.
in the long term, this is going to create problems. In my future, I would love to not have to frame all these things
Mm,
in the investor terms. I would
right.
like to kind of be on the same page where, it's not, we don't have to play that game, so to speak. But unfortunately, the way the world is, with investors holding more power in most
Yeah.
situations, that is necessary. But that there are ways to really do that strategically, and it's been really cool in some of our work with movement leaders to see how folks are able to frame their kind of like organizing work in those investment terms.
Yeah.
Um, like I think it can be very daunting at first, but like we've seen lots of like aha moments of like, oh, we just need to say that this is bad for
Yeah.
investors.
And
um,
show them how, right?
yeah, yeah. So we're not doing a ton of that work right now on the what we call capital strategies, which is that like organizing piece. But that's a really important you know area to develop. So anyone listening to this and thinking, okay, how can we engage finance?
Yeah.
And it feels very like out of reach. It's no different than trying to get your city council to do something
Right.
different. It's just a different kind of field.
Right. Well, I love how you put that because I would not have considered myself like, you know, skilled in doing that, but I've done a lot of work around like trying to move city and state legislators in a particular way, and so it's just transferring those skill sets into, like you said, like another sector, which a lot of communities have those skill sets around community organizing and reframing for whoever the target is, like you said. So you're not doing a lot of work. Transform Finance is not doing a lot of work in that area. What area are you really focusing in on now?
Yeah, so we're a small but mighty organization. So I really wish we could focus on all the 10, 20 different projects that we have brewing in the back of our minds at any time. But right now, we have I would say two main focuses, and both really have to do with this ownership piece. So our first area of work is around alternative ownership enterprises, which is really the entirety of business models that are shifting both economic and governance rights away from investors to other stakeholders like workers, community members,
Yeah.
Stewards of a purpose. So there's some employee ownership models that are more well known, like worker cooperatives, employee stock ownership plans, that we feature, but also lots of new kind of legal structures and variations like employee ownership trusts. There's cooperative holding companies. There's partial employee ownership models. So that's employee ownership piece, but then there's also an important element of multi-stakeholdership that we're interested in too. So like, what are businesses that bring multiple stakeholders to the table? And then lastly, there's this whole group of which is kind of a newer concept, this whole group of businesses that are centering purpose instead of profit for any individual stakeholder group. And there's this concept of steward ownership that comes from Germany. There's this organization called Purpose there that has a US spinoff as well that has helped really design and popularize the idea of like having a trust, a nonprofit, a foundation, own a company so that the company acts in purpose of a mission rather than returns for stakeholders. And there's a bunch of different ways to do that we feature in this report. So we've been looking at all these different enterprise models and, like I said, put out a report on that. But now I really focus on like mobilizing capital markets for this field. So we're really trying to figure out what kind of financial innovations might need to be created to unlock capital. How do we educate investors who could be investing in this space, doing narrative building work? So that's a whole area for us right now, and it's exciting because there's a lot of stuff going on. It feels like a very pivotal moment for this field, which I think I foreshadowed earlier. So that's the enterprise ownership work. But the other main area that we're interested in right now is focus on land, real estate, and housing, also with an ownership lens. There's a lot of really exciting work happening in that area and figuring out, how we can combat some of the housing crisis that we see all across this country. And also that connects to land back movement, how we can think about different ways of governing and owning land, which often requires a transfer of land from one owner to another. And then in terms of like commercial development, there's a lot of really awesome projects that are totally community run that are trying to raise money, buy building, and then have this kind of community-led process for figuring out what goes into the building, how it's governed and managed. And I say one building, but some of them are like multi-properties. It's just more in the commercial side rather than housing. So a big goal of ours is to figure out how we can help mobilize more capital to support the folks who are doing that work. Because, I think that's really, in my opinion, then what's needed and kind of the next frontier of impact in this space is to figure out how we can get, economic benefits of real estate development more equally distributed, and prevent, displacement, for communities that are really struggling with that, and have communities shape the urban, or not just, I should not say urban environment, just the
Yeah.
environment, because a lot of these
Right.
projects are not just happening in urban communities.
Yeah.
But I sit in New York City here, so it's always tough.
I'm super excited about that work because it's so funny. Just before we jumped on to record this, I was looking. I came upon this uh, development company that owns commercial properties like all over the United States. And one of the things they've been doing, and I'm guessing this may be because, and this is just a theory of mine, because now there's not too many more like bricks and mortar shops are kind of going out of style, right? And it's more online, and so what they offer is small business development program of development training in order to get into being able to have their brick and mortar site. And
Mm.
so I thought that was an interesting piece. And I thought, I wonder, and this was before we talked, like, I wonder if you could do that same thing with commercial properties, but have it be community run and owned, right? And that really it's multiple things, right? It's around sharing real estate and having community involved in like what gets built and for who, but also helping to support small businesses, but then also sort of the workforce development piece around creating businesses that people want to work at, right? Within like rural or native communities. And then the whole housing thing you talked about, I mean, that I can't wait. Are these reports done? I mean, is the work? Are you still in the process? Because I want to get my hands on that.
No, we don't have a report coming out on that.
Mm.
For that work on the land, real estate, and housing
Right.
ownership. We're in early stages of really figuring out where our kind of best point of impact is going to be, because we're just
Yeah.
wrapping up this first major phase of the enterprise work, and now thinking about that.
Yeah.
But I can tell you there's a lot of resources out there that have already been documenting some of this stuff. We're not the only ones looking at it, so I'd be happy to share some resources with you
Yeah.
too, and anyone who's listening.
Yeah. That'd be great. I think, when you look at like native people, if you look, a lot of times some of the economic challenges, but also the benefits are their rurality, their distance away from major business centers, right? Their ruralness. Um, and that's not always a bad thing, right? There's a lot of like positives in that. But how do you do workforce development and create sort of really important livable wage careers? We call them purpose professions, right? Where it's something you want to get up, you're happy to do, it contributes to community. You can get paid well so that you can live in Hawaii, which is pretty costly. That you can live in your rural community that maybe you've been in for generations, and you don't have to move to a city center. And so that has a lot of intersections into both like real estate, because sometimes in a lot of those areas, particularly in Hawaii, we find that a lot of people with money go to those areas and build these huge homes that then makes it very difficult for people who've been there for generations to be able to afford to live. And they're not building rental properties. And so again, that's there these large estates, and so every sort of employment opportunity becomes service employment,
Hmm.
which does not pay what you need to live. And in particular, I'm thinking of the community of North Kohala, which is pretty rural, but a lot of families having to move out because they can't afford, and the work that is there does not allow them to stay. And so, how do you sort of blend workforce development, real estate, and community sort of input and control, and creating quality like employment, and having community define what quality is? Part of that is pay, right? But not necessarily all of it. I mean, there was a report done by a group in Hawaii that identified like part of the quality of work in Hawaii is being able to live in the place that you grew up in. and to be
Mhm.
able to stay in Hawaii. And so, and wanting to like have community contribution. And so, how are the other ways? So, I'm really sort of, I'm going to stay connected to, I mean, I always get your books and newsletters, but stay connected to you guys around that real estate piece because it's an important piece in Hawaii. Um, and not all of the big landowners um, are, a lot of them are Native Hawaiian organizations who, for trust reasons, are, I mean, they do give out land and they do, give out land, but they're for trust reasons, they have to hold on to that land. But to start to think about this, like, I want to see that stewardship coming out of Germany, what that's all about. I want to, like, see these different models, I guess, and how we can maybe open up real estate because real estate is a very hot thing in Hawaii and very much the cost of it is impedes agriculture. It impedes our ability to uh, build affordable housing. It's just it's a big challenge for us.
Mm.
So I'm super excited to see that.
Yeah, yeah. I think, I mean, I like everyone I know who lives in a kind of vacation oriented town, whether it's upstate New York or some place like Asheville, North Carolina or Hawaii, where, there's so much interest in development and folks who have been there for, generations are, now, face the questions of how to stay in place. I think it's important to not just think of that as like an urban problem, like you're saying. Like,
Right.
I think, if there's like massive estates being built, but there's, it's not a high density place. You know, I'm not, I'm not an expert on this, so I
Yeah.
can't, yeah, but it gets my mind going. I think of some of the work that Trust Neighborhoods has done in developing this
Yeah.
concept of the fixed income neighborhood trust,
Yeah.
which is now cropping up in different places around the U.S. What would it look like to have this kind of version of development that has this broader geographic landscape as under one kind of umbrella with a trust, and there's some quote unquote market rate properties that subsidize perpetual affordability for
Right.
other properties in the trust.
Yeah.
It's really building off of the historic community land trust movement, which is great in certain contexts, but like kind
Yes.
of tweaking that idea of perpetual ownership. And
Right.
actually, that model, the mixed income neighborhood trust, uses the same legal structure as the steward ownership
Oh.
concept that I mentioned, the enterprise space, in the US at least, which is the perpetual purpose trust. But we don't have to get into trust law right now.
Right.
But that idea, I think folks are really thinking about the idea of ownership and permanence, and what does it look like when like a really important asset that is so fundamental to the well-being of communities, whether it's a
Right.
business or land or housing. What does it look like when that is actually not up for sale, and that's going to be governed by you know a, a, a document that centers communities and typically has voices and stewards of the mission, to make sure
Yeah.
that it stays true to what the original developers were trying to get at.
Yeah. And we're very familiar with trust here in Hawaii because we had, um, at the time when we were being colonized, our ali'i or our leaders set up these trusts that have lasted since, I mean, they've lasted
Hundreds.
hundreds of
Yeah.
years. And they are land trusts. And they've been threatened, definitely, by like IRS and, everybody wanting to get their control because of the cost of land in Hawaii. And so, but those are, while those are Hawaiian organizations, and they do at some level engage community does not really own those lands.
Mm.
It is still held by in trust, which I'm not gonna try to dismantle that because that's an important piece of our uh, legacy of our ali'i and what they thought. But I think you could sort of take that same idea and think about what it looks like if a community owns it. If an organization comes together and really has like engaged community in owning that same same kind of structure. And I have no clue about trust laws or any of that, but I mean, we are familiar with these sort of the idea of trust, very familiar in Hawaii, and the benefit it can actually have on community when they are set up in perpetuity for a particular people and a particular purpose. So, would love to see what that looks like at a community level, and maybe even try our hand at it.
The idea of a trust neighborhood is really interesting, and it has a lot of potential in applying to, like, especially with affordable housing, right? So if you have
Yeah,
a hui within a community, that these people will either a living there, or they just want to invest in the actual project, that it's more community driven, and they're not as far removed
mhm,
as just with a new for affordable housing project that goes up. Realtors hop in, they scoop in a good handful of units, then they sell them piece by piece. Then foreign investors come in, and so it kind of squeezes out the native population, as well as many people in the community. So wow, yeah, the idea of trust neighborhood sounds really
right.
interesting, really, really interesting.
All the way to the person like just like developing it, right? Like what do we want our houses to look
Yeah.
like? I mean, a lot of times you go into like homestead communities and people have extended their living rooms into their garages. Well, maybe we should just like have open lanais because that's the way we want to like function.
Even something like that on a small business scale is is great, because long term it could literally keep down that climbing rent that can always happens within commercial property.
Yeah,
Because either a people can't afford to keep their business there, or can't afford to move their business there, and or different
yeah.
financial reasons on being able to get into that property. So yeah, being able to have that more community based commercial property would be really interesting as well. Sorry, my brain is just kind of thinking of all the
I
possible
know, right?
applications,
That's good.
because
I know. I have to take a
yes,
pause.
because even as a, right, if you have a Native Hawaiian organization, let's say a Native Hawaiian organization that wants to purchase a parcel of land and then put up kind of like a physical structure for other Native Hawaiian businesses, that's a lot of possibility, and I see it
That's what I'm
especially with
thinking
our
about.
entrepreneur program, because
Yeah,
some of the a couple of one of the businesses that we do work with, he rents commercial space in order to make his product, because a affordability into purchasing or even renting somewhere that has a commercial kitchen, and things like that. So it would break down a lot of barrier to entry for some of these businesses that are just really just trying to get off the ground.
Yeah, and there are definitely examples of stuff like
Mhm.
that. I think one of the things that we Transform Finance can do as a national
Mhm.
organization, that really looks at this stuff and tries to shift perspectives, especially with investors around it, is just being able to try to connect some dots. So I think that's been some of the feedback we've gotten is like, for folks in Hawaii, for folks in wherever it might be in Kansas City, in Michigan, to
yeah,
just know that, oh, hey, someone in Boston, someone in Austin, Texas has already been
right,
working on this. It's like, yeah, I had a conversation with someone who's doing that a year ago.
right.
I think I think this really is a movement to like really reconsider these things, and we're actually not as alone as maybe the more traditional forces of capital want us to
Right.
believe, and we can develop these things. And just the conversation that you two were just having of like, oh, maybe this, maybe that, maybe this, like that's how all these things start.
Right.
From everything I've heard, it's just people who really are seeing a need and saying, what can we do about it? What are the tools at our disposal? And then what kind of support can we get?
Yeah.
But let's do it in a way that keeps the community in charge, rather than handing it the keys off at some point. I think
Yeah.
that's really the key difference.
Yeah, and I'm a big proponent of not recreating the
Yes.
wheel. And so if somebody else has been doing it, like I want to learn from them and then take bits and pieces that like maybe a knot might be like stock and barrel and then just like move it here. But there are pieces that you can sort of blend together to make it appropriate. And like you said, like pulling in the tools. But first of all, you have to know about the
Mhm.
tools that are out there. And that's why I think like the work that you folks are doing is sort of like bringing those tools to light, sharing that work out in community. That's how I kind of like got to know you folks, and sort of connect into your work, because I was looking around for like who else is doing this. I have this thought in my head. I know I cannot be. I know I'm not that brilliant. This is not an original thought. Like somebody else has thought about it, um, and I liken it to sort of my earlier career experiences around like recreating education with from a native perspective. It's the same thing as like looking at finance, looking at the tools that are out there and utilizing it to make it fit, sort of the native context. And so I really want to like thank you for all of the work, because you make our work a little bit more easier because you're pulling all that information into one place. And I know in our previous sort of our first meeting, you connected me to people who were doing the work that I was wanting to do. And it's great to get to talk to people in the field who have the same ideas. And like you said, connect to them, and build the movement, right? Be a part of it at least. So thank you.
Yeah, no, and for us, it's the best part of this job is being able to talk to folks like you who are really doing the work and building the things.
Hmm.
And it's really exciting just to be able to like be in conversation,
Hmm.
and to help form community around this. Like I was saying, this is a movement, and we're figuring out it as we go along.
Yeah.
uh, and that's the way it is, but it's fun.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time today. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. So that pretty much feels like a good place to kind of put a pin in this conversation, because I'm sure it would be great to talk to you again later
Totally.
as we're both kind of doing
Totally.
more things. So everyone, thank you for joining us. And today we are speaking with Curt Lyon with Transform Finance, and he's the executive director there. Thank you for joining us on All Things Change. And Curt, so
Yeah.
where can people find you, folks?
Yeah, so you can just go to transformfinance.org. That's our website. We have all the resources that we've ever put together are up there. We have a contact page, description of our work. So yeah, that's how you can find us, reach out. We have a contact form there. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Okay. And then do you folks post anything on social media? Can people find you folks there, or not so much?
Yes, I forgot that we're in the 21st century.
No worries.
Yeah. So we do have a Twitter, or X, whatever it's called now, which is at transformfin, Fin. Um, and for those of you on LinkedIn, we actually have a lot of conversations on LinkedIn, because that seems to be where a lot of interesting stuff is going on these days.
Yeah.
So you can just find us, search Transform Finance.
Sounds good. And
Awesome.
then, so guys, we hope you found some inspiration, some insights, and a lot of good information in today's podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to share it and like it. And comment if you have any comments. If you have any thoughts or stories or topics for future podcast recordings, please reach out to us. You
Yeah.
can find us on the socials. We're at Change Makers HI, or you can go to our website, which is changemakershawaii.org. And we love hearing from you guys, so please make sure to reach out. So thank you again for your time today, Curt. It was a pleasure.
Aloha.
Ahui ho.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks.